Good night, all Guyanese from in Guyana and in the diaspora. We welcome you once again to our Saturday night special, the AFC Saturday night special to bring you up to date and informed as to what's going on in the country and to feed you the facts. Lately here, lies have become the order of the day in the present government. So that's why we come every Saturday night to make sure that you actually know what's going on and to hear the real facts, not the alternative facts that are being peddled by those who seek to achieve their own personal interest. So tonight we've got our own Derek Basdio, and Derek, as you know, he lives on a quarantine, and but he's back and forth between Guyana and the USA in Florida, and then of course we've got Ewart Marshall, and Ewart also is a member of the diaspora, but we all have interest, and then of course I'm Vincent Adams, and I'm also a member of the diaspora. So you're gonna get a diaspora flavor tonight, but still with the Guyanese interest in mind. So again, we're gonna start first with Mr. Bazio. Tell us what's on your mind, Derek, and to let the people know what is going on there in your neck of the woods in the quarantine. I mean, you mute. Take off your mute, Derek.
We can't hear you there. Well, while he gets that resolved,
Yeah.
I'll say good night to the Guyanese people and good night, Dr. Vince. Thank you for having me on tonight. Sometimes people wonder why the diaspora, Guyanese in the diaspora, are so interested in what's going on in Guyana. And, I'd like to remind everyone that, whether or not you live in Guyana, if you were born there, you certainly take an interest in what's going on in the country. For myself, I have relatives there. I have a property there. I have business interests there. And so, what happens in Guyana affects me. And I suspect that many, many people in the diaspora are in a similar situation. And, they follow what's going on in Guyana because it affects them and, their loved ones back home. So I'm glad to have this opportunity to speak and perhaps lend a diaspora perspective to what I'm seeing and hearing.
Thanks, Ewart. I guess we've lost Derek. You wanna go
Yeah,
ahead
he'll
and
keep.
then Ewart, or you want for me to start with mine?
Well, one of the things that concern me most is, the cost of living, in Guyana, inflation, and since the country has discovered oil and gas and all the activity which we support, prices have gone up for the ordinary Guyanese, and that puts pressure certainly on us overseas to help with remittances and barrels and different things. And so I'd like to hear your ideas, Dr. Vince, on how the government in Guyana can alleviate some of these pressures.
Well, you know, of course you don't see a real substantial or a plan of substance to address the poor people. Even if you look at the budget that was passed. The budget is targeted towards the affluent and the rich. You've heard the opposition has been making some recommendations to take care of what we grew up to know as the small man, but the small man is not taken care of. Here we are with all of this money now. I can't remember how many hundreds of billions, 600 something billions of dollars, and instead of the economy is getting better, the economy is a reflection of what the people, not the people who are up at the top, of the income echelon because they're taken care of by the government. There's no question about that. That's not even debatable. It's what's happening to the people down at the bottom. They're still struggling to put food on their table, to pay their rent, to buy gasoline now that gasoline is skyrocketing. So, but the opposition is coming out on a daily basis with several suggestions, and the only thing you hear from them is not even to consider these suggestions, but to just shoot it down, which is exactly, the modus operandi is to just get rid of all inclusiveness. They don't need any outside opinion. They know it all, but the people are still suffering. The people are still suffering, Ewart, and of course it pains us all to see what is happening, especially when you hear us bragging about how much money that we're making. Not to mention, that we're getting ripped off big time in terms of what we should really be earning. But is what are we doing with the well, it's a relatively large amount compared to our budget, etc. What are we doing with it? We are not taking care of the masses of Guyana. Um, the evidence is there, and the evidence is there that the opposition is. I'm not the opposition. That the government in office, all it is a bunch of excuses. Look what happened to the rice farmers here recently. Instead of here we are making all of this money, and the rice farmers go out to protest that their income, the rice farmers, are the breadbasket of Guyana. They are responsible for a lot of our export of rice. They go out there and they're protesting because the price of their paddy has been cut. The millers that they sell the paddy to, from my understanding, they're making more money on the market. Now that is not fair, and they're the ones that are being protected by this government. So again, they went out there to protest, and then you've got police just abusing and mishandling them and putting them and locking them up, taking them off to the jail. So that's the situation we have. Of course, the rice farmers, who were supposed to be a big supporter in that area. The demographics of the rice farmers are a big supporter of the PPP. So the PPP, they're even letting down their own supporters that put them in office. So that's the disappointment. They're not only disappointing their own supporters, they're disappointing everybody in the country, and especially the masses.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Dr. Vince. When you read and hear about all the talk of supporting agriculture in the country, they're not going to rely solely on oil and gas. The actions don't support what is being said by the government. If they can do this to what we believe their core supporters. I mean, what I could only imagine what's happening to other sectors of the economy. What's happening with sugar, what's happening, with gold, what's happening in every sector of the economy. And it's not enough, in my opinion, to say, well, we have this much money coming in from the sale of oil and gas. If it doesn't get to the ordinary person in some way, shape, or form, then people are well, in this case, they're worse off because prices are going up, as though they're getting, they're sharing in some of this windfall, which we know they are not. And so I'd like to hear from the government concrete plans on how they're actually going to share this new wealth with people, and how they're going to deal with inflation and the other shocks to the economy.
And you are.
Yes, go ahead.
You know what is so glaring? As I don't know when last you've been back home, but if you arrive in Guyana, you would swear Guyana is one of the richest countries in the world, because multi-million-dollar properties are going up all over the place. Construction is crazy all over the place. And the ordinary person cannot even afford to buy a piece of land or to even rent a house. The cost of renting is just skyrocketing. Nobody with ordinary income could now afford to rent a small apartment in Georgetown or even its environs. because their friends and their rich folks are being taken care of, but the ordinary people and most of the people are not. I mean, it's plain to see. So that is, but I want to, but it comes down again to Ewart. It comes down to inclusiveness of even consideration within, who should benefit, and inclusiveness also in who are making the decisions. You know, you know, I, and of course we all know that Guyana, it's racially divided, and that's what drives our politics. But then you hear the government, you hear the president and vice president, talking about one Guyana, which is, oh, I welcome that. Um, but then their actions does not exhibit what they're talking about. I was I was really disappointed, for example, with the vice president in a recent interview, and in criticizing me for identifying or observing some things that are happening at the EPA, which I thought it's not in the best interest of the country in terms of what's in the permit, and they're not carrying on. The vice president got up. He said, "Well, we're doing this. Not only me, but everybody who's criticizing the EPA. They're doing it because the guy who runs the EPA is Indian." Now, to me, that is just fueling this racial divisiveness in this country, whereas the vice president should be even, trying to unite the country. So that's the kind of divisiveness that is, sowing the seeds of racial divisiveness instead of bringing us together. So that's part
Yeah,
of the problem in terms of we're not having unity. You should not be pulling the race card on the nation. And then, of course, the emasculation of Mr. Patterson's motions for the, as you know, the full coverage insurance, which is critical to the Guyanese people, and also on the flaring, which is also critical for the Guyanese people. Both motions were presented to Parliament by Mr. Patterson, and they just emasculated it. No inclusion. They don't want anybody's opinion. They're going to do it by themselves. The NRF, the National Reforce Fund, today I just saw the most egregious statement that I've ever seen. What the vice president said, Derek, you guess what the vice president said. He said that they welcome diversity, but not political diversity. Now, does that make any sense? You've got to work with political parties. What that is telling me, that is only all about the PPP civic. They're not going to entertain any ideas. So that's what's going on here, Ewart. That's what's going on here. He made it clear today that they do not want political diversity. That's a quote. He may come back, knowing this guy, he may come back and said he was taken out of context. That's the person he is. But so that laid the foundation and tells you exactly where they're coming from. They have, they don't want anybody else to give them any opinion or ideas as to how to move the country. And then, of course, the oil and gas conference, probably the biggest conference we ever had. Again, they decided that there weren't anybody who do not support them who were qualified to participate in that oil and gas conference. One of the biggest conference we probably gonna ever had, and one of the biggest conferences that would impact the economy. So those are the kind of things, Ewart, that this whole inclusiveness and racial divisiveness. And by the way, I've told him this many times. I want to remind the vice president that when he accused me somehow of because I'm attacking somebody because of their race, I want to remind that my mother is Indian. Okay, my mother is Indian. And most of the people who are also criticizing the EPA are also Indians. So he does these things, it's no question, it's deliberate to continue to fuel the racial tension to satisfy their agenda of divisiveness within that country, and it's unbecoming of anybody who wants to lead this country. I have a lot of respect for the office of the vice president, but I think this here just demeans it, when you behave in this manner.
Yeah, well, there's no question about it. Whenever this current government in Guyana has their back against the wall, they come out and play some sort of race card or something like that. So talk some dog whistle, as they say. Use coded speech and language and suggestions in order to exclude half the population in the country. If the opposition is not included on these boards and in decision making and in parliament in any substantial way, then they've effectively dismissed half the population. That's what they're saying. We don't care what you think or how you feel or how any of this affects you. And it's a big mistake. We all have to remember that the difference in parliament is one or two seats. So
Yep.
an election could turn on any number of things. And I'm always struck by Guyana's politics, where a party goes in and operates as though it will be in there for the next 20, 30 years, not knowing or not realizing that in the current situation in Guyana electorally, um, no one is going to run away with elections. So you can easily lose an election. And so when a party or government does these policies, it's very short-sighted that they don't realize that they will be out of office. Not might be out of office. They will be out of office, and all this stuff will be reversed. It would be wise for the private sector to use whatever influence it has on this government to tell them that the opposition has to be included, because when you are a business owner, an entrepreneur, you want to have some idea of what's coming down the road, and you don't want it to the pendulum to swing from one end of the from one end to the other, and depending on who's in government, you want certain things to be settled, and not have to worry about, should I put in or put in a large investment in something that the next government to make it hard for me to conduct business. Guyana is in a different league now,
Hmm.
economically and politically. And so we can't operate in the same ways we've been operating for decades. There has to be a seriousness to governance and to inclusion.
Yep, I totally agree with you, Ewart. And the other thing is, as a leader of the country, and like I said, I have great reverence for the office of the prime minister, not the prime minister, the president, the vice president, all the ministers, people in authority. There's no question. But when you have people who demeans the office to stoop to certain level, especially like what the vice president does, to just barefacedly just lie to the people. And I want to the vice president up to recently here, just a couple of days ago, had an interview, and he was responding, by the way, on this whole thing about full coverage insurance, that they've been taking a lot of heat, that he himself, he meaning because he's in charge of the EPA, but they've been neglecting to even enforce their own laws and giving Exxon just a free pass to do whatever they want to do. So here's what the vice president has been saying. So folks, here's what the facts are. The vice president just a few nights ago suggests that I, as head of the EPA, signed the Lisa 1 and 2 permit. First of all, that's a blatant lie. I was never there when the Lisa 1 permit. I came over a year and a half or so after the Lisa 1 permit was signed. And as a matter of fact, the Lisa 1 permit was signed by the current um, head of EPA that was put there by Mr. Jagdio and the PPP. But that's not the issue. But Mr. Jagdio, he must tell people what the facts are. I had nothing to do with Lisa 1. Then he says now, in using that line of argument, that the Lisa 1 and 2 permit that I signed had no type of controls for full coverage insurance, and then they significantly improved it in the Payaro. Well, guess what? The the Lisa One permit had a half a page of anything to do with insurance, and all it says that EEPGL will be responsible for any spill. Well, EEPGL didn't have any zero assets to cover any spill, and I was the one who, when I came in with Lisa 2, I said absolutely not. I forced Exxon into agreeing to have an insurance, and anything that the insurance can't cover, the parent company have to cover. That's written into the Lisa 2 permit, which became a 3-page section rather than a half a page section. And it's written into the Lisa 2. It says, first of all, thou shalt have an insurance, and anything that is not covered by that insurance has to be covered by the parent company of Exxon, Hess, and Sunup. It's in a permit. This government allowed Exxon to go ahead and start up Lisa 2 without those requirements being satisfied, those legal requirements. So I don't know if he's being slick and trying to divert attention from that type of a lawlessness that is going on there, where they're not even enforcing. In the PIARO, he says, well, they improve the PIARO. The PIARO has exactly the same language in Lisa 2 that I put into Lisa 2. The PIARO language did not change. So all of that is a bunch of lies. The vice president has another thing, he talks, well, they're treating the water now. When I was there, they never treated the water. Well, I think he ought to apologize to Exxon, because I would have been really pissed off if I was Exxon and he's saying that I wasn't treating water, because the international standard required you to treat the water. But the thing is, you're not treating the water. And I don't know if it's just true ignorance that the vice president is speaking from, or if he's misinformed. But the only requirements for treatment is to make sure that the oil concentration that you dump into the ocean, this is from produced water with the oil, it goes down to 42 to a certain concentration, which is, if with a large volume, with a small concentration, you're going to get a lot of oil being dumped into the ocean. As a matter of fact, with the billions of barrels of water that is expected to be dumped in the ocean, even after treatment, the cumulative is going to be hundreds of billions of barrels of oil being dumped into the ocean at 3 times the temperature of the ocean. So when he talks about treatment, but the treatment was there all the time. The language is just a small, it hadn't been changed. That's not the issue. The issue that I changed, I said, no, you're not going to dump water into the ocean. You're going to have to re-inject it back into the reservoir. You're not going to pollute the ocean, destroy fishing, and destroy the rest of the Caribbean economies. What he's saying, well, they're treating water now. That's nonsense. It's a big fat lie. The treatment of water has always been there, and Exxon can tell you that's the international standard for treating that water. However, that water still contains a myriad of toxic and hazardous chemicals, heavy metals, mercury, lead, all types of metal, and radioactivity. That's the water we're dumping into the ocean, and this president is defending it. The issue, when I was there, I demanded that they re-inject that water. Not only me, we set up a committee with the EPA, the GGMC, the Department of Energy, and the same Canadian company that they hired to put together the PIARO. We all agreed unanimously. We met with Exxon and told them they have to re-inject the water. The World Bank says you have to re-inject the water, and the only reason you may be allowed not to inject the water is if it's not economically feasible or if it's not technically feasible. Well, it is technically feasible, no question, and it is economically feasible. When you ask them why they don't want to inject it, well, it's going to cost $300 million. Well, they're telling us that the people's lives and livelihood in Guyana is not, and in the Caribbean, is not value of $300 million when you're making tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars. Then, so that's not a big fat lie, because we said they have to re-inject it. We met with Exxon. We made the decision. We told them that's what they've got to do. And as soon as I left in August, in September, they signed off the PIARO, eliminating that from what was going to be in the PIARO. So these big lies that the PIARO has been improved, the PIARO has the same exact language as the Lisa 2 that I put in there for the rest of the stuff, except I was changing the PIARO to include re-injection rather than dumping of water. So the third thing that the vice president mentioned, he goes around talking, well, we know we have cradle to grave. The vice president would even know what cradle to grave means if it hits him between the eyes. I guess it rolls well on his tongue, so he likes talking about it. So here, what cradle to grave means. It means that Exxon. Here's what Exxon was doing when I arrived. All the waste, all this toxic and hazardous waste that they were generating, they were handing it off to their treatment facilities, such as Tiger Tank and the rest of the folks. They were handing it off and then just wiping their hands of it without any responsibility. I said, absolutely not. You will be responsible for that waste from the time it's generated to the time of final disposal. On top of that, every one of these treatment facilities have to have what is called a waste acceptance criteria, meaning because let's say Exxon sends waste to Tiger Tank. Tiger Tank treats the waste with lots of mechanisms. One of those is like incineration. You have got to show that your equipment could handle that waste that you're receiving. But that was not happening. So that's where the waste acceptance criteria. You cannot be designing an equipment for treating, let's say, just name a waste, mercury or some hydrocarbon, but your system is not designed for that. Or you cannot be sending solids to be incinerated or treated, and your system is not designed for that. So you've got to have a waste acceptance. The burial site at Higgs Bush has to have a waste acceptance criteria. And that's a different discussion because that landfill is totally inadequate. And I told them beforehand that I was not going to permit it. They don't have a double liner, which is required. That the bottom of that thing is like only like 6 feet or less from the groundwater table. So there's nothing protecting it besides that 6 feet, which is absolute nonsense because you normally would have 50 feet of clay plus plus 2 liners. So this whole cradle to grave thing, and I was the one who brought it to Guyana and to the EPA. Nobody knew anything about cradle to grave. None. I was the one who taught my staff. I was the one who wrote the letters to direct Exxon to in terms of the procedure and how you put together the plan to have this cradle to grave program. So when he says, well, now we've got a cradle to grave, he's taking credit for everything, and he knows that it's just like Ewart. You remember when this whole flaring thing had come up several months ago, since last year, and then he decided to lie again by saying, hey, my hands are tied. When he got cornered and he didn't want to stop Exxon from flaring, he said, oh, my hands are tied because Vincent is the one who gave them a 14 billion cubic feet of gas as an allowance that they can flare. So when I challenged him in the newspapers, and I challenged the media to challenge him to show them where that 14 billion allowance is. He said it's in the EIA. I challenged him. I said, go read the EIA. So when they caught Exxon now in a press conference, Exxon said, who, me? I don't know anything about any 14 billion. So he got thrown under the bus by Exxon. And so he stopped doing that. So now he's coming up with all this stuff about cradle to grave and all this kind of nonsense, which are just a pack of lies. So that's the credibility of the leadership that we have, Ewart, in terms of just misinforming the public that should be trusting them with information, and then of course not even looking out for their interests economically and wanting to have any inclusiveness of the opposition to give ideas. Well, it's not even the opposition, it's anybody who does not support them, like you said, it's about half the population. So that's how they're operating. And I don't know, I feel sad for the country with that type of leadership.
Well, Dr. Vince, before we move on to a different topic, I've heard you describe your life as a little boy growing up in Linden, where the water was toxic and you'd swim and your skin would be affected. If you could speak briefly about that, because for many people, the effects of environmental degradation are not obvious, So I want you to describe briefly what that was like when you were a youngster.
Hey, Ewart, it's I would never if I had to live my life again, that's how I would like to live it. I grew up not only in Linden, but in the alleys of Christianborg of Linden, which is on the other side of the river that nobody ever wants to go, it's one of the more poverty-stricken areas we have. Grew up. By the way, myself and the current leader of the opposition, Aubrey Norton, we grew up in the same neighborhoods and stuff like that across it. Yeah, but you're right. I remember when I used to play cricket. We playing cricket in the ball fields or on the streets, and in the middle of the day, you have to stop playing because you cannot see like 2 feet in front of you because of the bauxite dust. There were no filters, nothing at all. Then we go swim in the rivers. And of course, what the ships used to do is they enter the river, the Demerara River, because they couldn't do it out in the open ocean. They would wash all the dirt and all the tar and everything into the river. So the river had a thick layer of tar. So we used to go swim in it, and it would be all over our skins, and it used to like taste nice or stuff. And we used to take kerosene to take it off. Well, not knowing, when I came up here and I had my first chest X-ray, the doctor couldn't figure out what the heck happened to me because my entire lungs were just scarred, all over. And it was after the second or third visit when we talked, when he started asking me my background, he said, "Oh, yeah, it's that bauxite dust." But it's a lucky thing I was young enough to recover. But then when you look back to see how early a lot of our parents died because of that bauxite. My father used to, when he worked at a bauxite company, he used to have to get under those kilns, and those kilns used to be hundreds of degrees of Fahrenheit hot. If the seals are leaking, they got to go with shovels. When he comes home, his nose, his ears, and everything used to be just packed with bauxite. I mean, no wonder that a lot of our parents and foreparents that came from London, they died very, very early. So when I did, one of my years was, I did both petroleum and the environmental engineering here. That's why I had so much interest in water and air, and that's why I've been dedicating a lot of my life to making sure that what I experienced in Guyana does not happen in Guyana anymore. Of course, the big battle is fighting the government who is supporting the pollution, like the flaring of the gas offshore, and not protecting the people with some type of an insurance or assurance or full coverage, not getting any of that from the oil company, even though it's written into the law, into the permit that I put in there that you have to have that before you start up Liza 2. They still allow them to go and start up without that requirements. And so, but I've dedicated myself, Ewart. Guyana gave me everything I had. Even though I grew up in that community and I was the first to represent Guyana cricket as a teenager, as a matter of fact. And then of course, academics, I never paid a dime in school fees or education. And that's why, like the money we getting from oil, and most of my friends know, that the first thing we should have is free education from kindergarten right through university. That's the foundation of building any economy. You ask any big company, what brings them to your company to have foreign direct investment? The number one thing. If you ask them for three things, as a matter of fact, they're going to say education, education, education. So that's why I am dedicated. I've dedicated myself to giving back to my country that gave me everything, that laid the foundation for my success. Who would have known that somebody from Christianborg, Linden, would have been, in the highest ranks of the United States government, in the senior executive corps, running the day-to-day operations of the nation in some very, very sensitive areas and important areas of the country. Who would have thought that? But it all came from the people who held my hand, the neighborhood that raised me, the country that raised me, and the country that provided the resources for me to lay the foundation for me to be what I am today. So that's the reason, Ewart, why I'm here. I don't want that to happen. I don't want the same things to happen to the young people who are coming up that we used to have to endure when I was growing up in London.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the issue of education. I have a similar feeling about the education I received in Guyana before coming to the United States with my parents. There was a time when you were educated in Guyana and you came to the States. You were well ahead of everybody else your age.
Yep.
Um, and so we both have a lot to be grateful
If I
for, that
remember,
we were
Ewart,
born
and
in
I could be
Guyana.
wrong here, Ewart, not to cut you. If I remember, I thought at one time I remember hearing this when I was a little kid growing up in school. Guyana was the most literate country in either in the Western Hemisphere or in our part of the world. But we were the most literate country. I can't remember exactly what was the comparison. But anyway, that I recall that distinctly.
Yeah, my observations, I would have to agree with that based on my Guyanese friends when because there was a bunch of us, whose parents just came up when I was a youngster, and you could always know the Guyanese, or even not just the Guyanese, the Caribbean and the West Indies had a good education system, and still does in
Yep.
many respects. I mean, I know that you had brought up the issue of free education from nursery school through university, and certainly with the Guyana's economy changing and emphasis on STEM and all of the things that we'll need to develop the country. Could you talk a little bit about the programs that you helped to introduce at the university, and where you think we should go as far as finance and education and the types of education that people should have, throughout the country?
Yeah. Well, you know, fortunate, when in my position as as I said, as an executive running the day to day, as part of that core that ran the day to day operation of the U.S. government. When we had that major downturn in 2008, the world, economic crisis, we were required, those senior executives in my agency, the U.S. Department of Energy, we were required, and this was under the Obama administration, we were required to go to MIT, Sloan Business School, arguably the best business school in the world. We were required to go there for 2 weeks every 6 months. And it was not about science and engineering. You know what it was? We were there in class with all of the chief executives and chairman and and executives of the major corporations in the world, the Exxon types of the world, and we would spend that time with them, in the classrooms and informally and socially, and to see how what do we need to do to keep America competitive. And we would study what every country did, like the five, what we used to call the five Asian miracles, like the China, the India, the Singapore, and those, see exactly what they did. And an interesting comparison, here's where I was convinced about education and the type of education. The biggest comparison we made was China and India. In the 80s, before the economic crisis, we were already projecting that India would have been the next superpower. So we were, looking at India and see how, and the reason was it because if you go back and look at all the textbooks and the traditional training, it will tell you infrastructure, is what drives economies, foreign direct investment, because every economy, I mean, India, China, and all of those, if you look at their economies, the rise of their economies is directly related to foreign direct investment. So we said, okay, India will become the next superpower because they have 10 times, and there's a way of measuring, numerically the infrastructure. Um, so we looked at it. India had 10 times the infrastructure as China. And when we started seeing China taking off, it puzzled everybody. So when we were at MIT with all of these executives from business and studying what MIT, what the school business loan came up with, what we found, it was about education. It wasn't infrastructure, as what the traditional text would tell you. But then the question became, because when you look at the education, India, the illiteracy, not the literacy rate, the illiteracy rate of India was 39%. You know what it was in China? 9%. And then we started saying, well, okay, how is that possible? Because India has some of the best tertiary educations. I mean, the India Institute of Technology is just as good as MIT, or some argue it's even better. But India was focusing on that top level tertiary education, whereas China was in the middle, manufacturing, trade, technician types, maybe a first degree. That's where China was focusing it. So it's not only the education, it's the type of education. So in the United States, we had a major program, and still going on, where we had a special pay scale, because I used to go out and recruit. And of course, we look for the best students. And we used to compete with the private sector to get the best students out to school. And some of them had student loans. We used to pay their student loans, give them big bonus for coming on board, and give them training for their first 2 years. They used to be at every facility across the country to get training. We started our STEM programs. I ran that STEM program, as a matter of fact, for 10 universities. The underprivileged university, or the historically black universities. So we're developing the science, because science is the foundation of a developing country. Science and engineering. I mean, the rest of the stuff is important. For example, I remember when I gave the keynote address at the University of Guyana in 2016. I could not believe that we had over 60% of the graduates were social science graduates. We cannot continue to develop a country. Nothing is wrong with social science. I'm sure their time will come. But right now, we should be focusing on science, math, and engineering, the STEM programs. That's what's going to form the foundation. The other thing is to give them the opportunity. There's this divisiveness again in terms of how we select people. And even right now with EPA, and I'm sure the same is going on at all the other agencies. Look what happened when the PPP government came into office. They got rid of anybody that they felt that looked. You didn't even have to say anything. All you had to do is look like somebody who supported or did not support them, and you were gone. I can't, I couldn't keep up with the numbers in the thousands who were fired because of that fact. So we've got to have all of those that I just mentioned, but at the same time, we cannot do it on our own. The government has got to provide the environment, which is fair, and it has to be non-divisive. So we got to move away from this divisiveness and bring all the country together, one, in terms of unification, and give everybody an equal opportunity to compete with each other. Or else we're not going to get any place award. So that would be my master plan. Of course, education to me would be free, because had it not been free for me, award for me. And here's the other thing: a lot of you look at all the big stalwarts, all the big politicians, that are running the countries now. They went to school in my time, and almost all of them had free education. And if you recall, guess who abandoned free education in Guyana? You want to take a guess? The
These
PPP.
current
The PPP abandoned free education. Remember when on the Burnham, that was his vision, free education. That's how I went to school. Free education throughout, from kindergarten right through. The PPP was the party that got rid of free education, and people ought to remember that.
Mhm, mhm. Well, education is also related to industry. Certainly, you're educating yourself to, we're educating the population in order to help develop the country. How is the current education system and emphasis related to the local content? Of course, recently local content laws and policies were passed, and it has a certain table of what percentage of Guyanese should be involved in various sectors, various industries, and the like. And do you feel that right now we're prepared to really take advantage of the local content laws as they're currently written? I personally, I have no problem with what we're doing with local content. Guyanese must be the first to benefit from oil and gas. But based on your experience as an insider running a major agency, and also being involved with the university, do you feel that that we'll be able to implement this local content plan?
Well, here again, I didn't be a song as if you know, I cannot, I mean, my experience, of course, I would never trade my life again for anything. I had, my 30 years with the U.S. Department of Energy. It so happened that even in my recent years as the executive, I was responsible for developing local content policies because most of our, let's say, our nuclear weapons complex and stuff, they were located in, areas that was not as well off as the rest of the country. So we had to develop local content policies and programs and hold the contractors accountable. So, Ewart, my point is here again. We can go back to what's going on with Exxon. It's undebatable that the government is not holding Exxon and the mining and whoever else accountable. But they want. I just noticed here up to a couple of days ago, they're now talking about tightening. You know, giving people who probably break traffic laws. They're tightening up on traffic laws. You know, again, the small man always getting the short end of the stick. I just read, might have been 2 or 3 days ago, where they're looking at laws now to tighten it up on people who break traffic laws. I mean, imagine that. But they're not enforcing the law from Exxon, who's starting up without meeting the requirements of the permit to have full coverage insurance to protect the people, to protect the fishing industry, to protect the rest of the Caribbean if something happens. Because if something happens, where's Guyana going to get that money? It could run us into bankruptcy. So I don't care. It's a nice thing, Eward, to put stuff on people, to hoodwink everybody into believing, well, here, we've got something here. You look at it. But if I don't know if you've been following the news, that our own people, we've been getting less than minimum wage. The people who are coming in and from the foreign, coming in the foreign companies, when their salaries are compared to us, I can't remember in the time, but it's like 10. I might, I might have missed the number, but it's a major, bigger than way far. Even though we're doing the same work, they're making much more. We could not even sit at the same table with these people to have a meal. Ewart, the Guyanese people were getting leftovers. We used to call it left. That's the way that they're being treated. So all of this stuff in the local content, when you see Gawu of all complaining and fighting this issue, we have got the problem. So all this, as to hoodwink and blowing smoke and impressing everybody that we've got local content and it's written in the interest of the people, put your mouth, or what's the jargon there again?
Put your money where your mouth
Put
is.
your money where your mouth is, exactly. But don't it or walk the talk, you know. But that's been the modus operandi of this government. It's just to fool people, to lie to the people, to promise them. For again, where's the 50,000 jobs? Did you remember during the election campaign? What was their biggest slogan? We will provide 50,000 jobs. Where is the 50,000 jobs? Where is it? I think they even said, I could be wrong, and I stand corrected. I thought they even said within the first year or something, you know. But nevertheless, where is the 50,000 jobs that they were supposed to have created? So those are the kind of thing you want. It doesn't matter what you put on paper, um, in terms of this local content. It's what are you doing? You're not enforcing the law at Exxon to protect the people. You've got the people who are working on these, this local content thing, the people who are working on these ships, they're being treated as if they're, like in the days of slavery, I guess, where they got to sit by themselves, they got to eat the left, whatever is left over from it. And then their wages are many, many times less than the other folks who are doing the same exact job. So, so that's where we are. We need people who can, because here's the other thing. Here's the other thing, Ewart. You remember I told you, we in the training and everything else and my experience, where I said education is the number one criteria for attracting foreign direct investment. Guess what's the number two? Following the rule of law. That's what attract foreign direct investment. Infrastructure comes stored. Following the rule of law is number two. It's that important. And if the government itself is not even following the rule of law, I mean, what is the country? I mean, where would the country stand in terms of attracting foreign direct, in investment? So we are going in the wrong direction. And the sad thing about it is that the government does not want any input from anybody that appear. You just have to look as if you don't even have to say anything. You guys got to look as if you're not a person who support them. They only have a one-seat majority in parliament, and the way that they're ruling is as if they've got, probably 20 seats majority in parliament. So they really don't care, and they don't really, they really don't care what they do. And their tactic is that they're gonna get criticized all the time, but somehow it's gonna go away. People are gonna forget about it. But we cannot
Well,
allow people to forget it. That's the reason why we're having these programs.
wow. I'm going to come full circle around to what I talked about in the beginning with regards to the diaspora and people in Guyanese in the diaspora being affected by what happens in Guyana. As a person who is obviously in the diaspora and with a great interest in Guyana, I often contemplate what role we can play um, in Guyana's development, because I believe that not only must the Guyanese living in Guyana be seated at the table, but I believe there's a role for the diaspora with our love for the country first of all.
Yep.
Um, and also the things we've learned overseas that could certainly benefit Guyana. You are an example of that. You bring decades of experience and education to bear, and you're not asking anybody to pay you a big salary or anything like that.
Yep.
I feel the same way. I've benefited from being born in Guyana, and my formative years, in Guyana, and but finishing my education in the United States, and I would like to contribute to Guyana's development. And I'd like to hear what you think about what the diaspora can do in that regard.
Oh, absolutely. And I there was several months ago last year, I think it might have been last or the year before. There was a front page article about me, and it's about the diaspora and the importance of its involvement. It was a front page article. It might have been in the Starbuck News. I've made done a lot of interviews, even with the Wall. I think it was the Wall Street, or it was one of those international newspapers on the subject. And I believe to my soul that it's so critical to Guyana's development. I always like to say we had a major, what they call a brain drain, but here's an opportunity to turn that brain drain into brain gain. Like you rightly said, most of us who came up here, we acquired not only knowledge and experience, but wealth, resources, and we want to come back home to our beloved country. And when I hear it, it bothers me when I hear, well, you guys are outside. Had it not been for the diaspora, I don't know what Guyana would have been, because people used to be working 2 and 3 jobs to send home money and barrels, to make sure that their relatives and family go to school, to high school, to pay fees, to put food on their table, to pay rent. So we never disconnected ourselves. So now those same generations want to come back home and give back, not to make any big salaries. When I was at EPA, I never even negotiated a salary. I told him my main thing was to come back and give back to the country. And like Joe Harmon, I remember every time Joe Harmon used to give a speech, we used to have to go. You always just say, hey, what, this is one guy that we cannot afford to have him here. And you would not believe, the salary that he was making, etc., compared to everybody, especially the people that the PPP used to hire, in terms of what their remuneration is. But the diaspora is a key to Guyana's development. The thing is, the other thing that I experienced when I went back to Guyana, the buzzword was a consultant. We're quick to say we're going to hire a consultant. And as soon as we have said you got somebody who's coming from abroad, and they come, these people from abroad, they're no better than any Guyanese. I could find a Guyanese to fill every single position or to do anything, to provide any expertise to the Guyanese people. Any you name any requirement, I can find them. So when you have foreigners coming in, they do not have Guyana, their main interest. Their interest is to make money, and when push comes to shove, they're gone. Guyanese wants to come back home to give back and to really honestly do what is best for Guyana. So those are the people who should be coming rather than those hired guns. I like to call them hired guns that come in. Like Exxon, for example. I have absolutely nothing against Exxon. What I'm mad about is the government. Because if the government stand up and tell Exxon, hey, you know what, this is what I deserve and I should get, trust me, Exxon is a professional company. They're going to deal fairly with us. But if we don't demand what we deserve, their bottom line, they're going to make as much as their bottom line. You can't vex with them. So I'm not, Exxon is not my problem. But we have got to have a representative government to make sure that we have the right people. But instead of bringing in the best people from the diaspora, we stiff arm them and say, no, look, you remember Exxon give us a bill for 9.4 billion US dollars. We can't audit that bill. We're going to end up paying it because the 2 year has run out. And we said we don't have qualified people. Well, guess what, Ewart? A Guyanese firm in Texas send in an application, a bid for that contract. A highly qualified Guyanese firm send in a bid to do the audit. They can do it. They're qualified. Yet you hear the government say, but I guess what they looked at there, that the person seemed to not be a person who's one of their supporters. They couldn't even find the person's application at one time, or they claimed they couldn't find it until the person, the company started looking into it. They had the application there. Then the next thing you know, they never heard from them, as a matter of fact. And then the next thing you know, it's in, they say, well, we didn't find any company that was qualified. Nonsense. I know that company in Texas was qualified to do that audit, but they did not even acknowledge them that they exist, even though their application was in there. And because that company, again, this whole non-inclusiveness thing, they decided that, hey, they don't look like a company who would be one of our supporters. So that's the problem that we have. But the diaspora is a key part of it. But they push. Well, look how many diaspora highly qualified. Look at Dr. Jadapat. Look at even though he may not be part of the diaspora, he was working outside the country one time at CARICOM. Dr. Bino, Mr. Ben, I think he was at the UN. So all of us in the diaspora, they don't want us, even though we've got valuable knowledge, they don't want us around. So it's a sad state of affairs, Ewart. Sad state of affairs.
Well, we're coming to the end of our program, Dr. Vince, and I hope that Guyanese far and wide will take to heart what we've discussed here, and certainly there's a role to be played by the diaspora in Guyana's development, because we love the country and we bring a lot of experience and expertise. And so I would encourage the government, or those in power, to consider the Guyanese diaspora in the development of the country. I think we're at the end of our show here. We have a certain amount of time, and I'd like to say good night to the Guyanese people, and certainly to you, Dr. Vince.
Yep.
This is all food for thought, and we plan on taking part in the development of Guyana, and so you'll see more of us in the future. Good night, Dr. Vince.
Good night, T. Ward. Sorry we lost our good friend Derek. But next
We'll
time,
get him
I hope
next
we
week.
probably need to give him some training in this basic IT stuff. But good night to all, and thanks for listening, and look forward to chatting with you again.
Okay, good night.